recording, and we're back. All right. Hello everyone, welcome to another pre-hackathon workshop leading up to BlockHack this May 5th to May 6th. Today we're going to go over forking and tokens. And to do that we're going to go through a workshop on Ark, the Ark blockchain. Ark is one of our sponsors at the hackathon. They'll be running a workshop there and sponsoring a prize, and so in the lead up we're going to give you a quick look into their platform and what you can do with it. So first up, head over to the tutorial for forking the Ark clone, for making a clone of the Ark blockchain and issuing your own token. Link in the description. For this tutorial, you'll need your own you'll need your own private server. The reason that's important is once you are running the blockchain, it's a lot simpler if it's on its own server, its own dedicated server, so it's not interacting with any of your other programs. In the tutorial, they recommend using Vultr, which is a pretty cheap option. You can, of course, use whatever private server, dedicated server, or partition you want. So what I'm going to do in Bash is just SSH into root at 45.77.220.46. That's just the IP of our server. I've got the password copied in. And now just make sure you add a new user in addition to root. So I'm going to add jwood. Give it a password. Don't need to fill out any of that information. And then I'm going to give myself root privileges. All right. Now let's exit out and SSH back into this new user. 77.220.46. And we're in. All right. Now, let's make sure we have updates of packages, and the next few steps can just be copied and pasted in. And in a moment we'll be getting to a rather large chunk of files to download, and while we're waiting for that download, I'll be going over what the importance of forking, some of the history of past forks in blockchain are, and what are some of the differences between major token standards. All right. All right, now with that downloaded, the next chunk will be installing PostgreSQL and a few other packages. Then we're going to actually create the first database. And instead of doing ark_jark, we're going to do ark underscore, and because I've already done this before, I'm going to use a new database under my new name jwood. Right. Now there's this whole chunk of commands, and we can just copy and paste that in all as one. And now, while that's installing the Ark node, let's go over what the importance of forking is and what different kinds of tokens are. So forking is the idea that I can take the public blockchain and make a copy, which is relatively easy because most blockchain projects, most distributed public blockchain projects like Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all open source. So the code is all public, usually on GitHub, and anyone can pull it down and make their own version. And so there are two different kinds of forking. One is where you just clone a copy of the blockchain, which is what we're doing here with Ark. That's taking the code, copying it down, and making your own version. So the blockchain works the same way, but it's a completely different version of it. An example would be if you manufacture a copy of a toy. The new toy looks exactly the same as the other one, functions the same, but it's a completely different version. It's a different entity, right? And some companies take it a step further. They copy down a blockchain and then make their own additions and edits. For example, Litecoin, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Cash, those are all forks off of Bitcoin, and they, in particular, Litecoin was one where there was simply a disagreement over, hey, the developer said, hey, we want a different feature, we want to go in a different direction than what some of the other people wanted, and so they just broke off and made their own version. And that has happened a lot in the cryptocurrency community and the blockchain community. Lots of projects having differences of visions, and so they go off in their own direction. The other more complicated kind of forking is called hard forks. And that's where you not only edit, you don't just take the code that makes the blockchain, but you take the entire history as well. Remember, blockchain is a history of transactions. So we have all these transactions going through time, snapshots of history, and they're all linked together in that chain of blocks. Hard fork happens when someone decides, hey, I want to take the blockchain at this moment in history, and I want to make the changes starting here. So now they have their own version going off, but the history is shared with the original one, which it remains. An example of this was back in the summer of 2016. The Ethereum Foundation, which is the organization that runs the development for the Ethereum blockchain, they had a problem of one of their big projects, the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, or DAO, was one of the first big blockchain projects to have an ICO and raise funding. But they had written some bad code in the program that ran on top of the blockchain, and that program was vulnerable to a hack that essentially caused people to lose millions of dollars. So there's a basic disagreement. Should we fix this? We could reverse the history if we all agree on it. And so that's what the Ethereum Foundation did. They went to the just before the hack and started building off their history as if it was pre-hack version of blockchain. Some people disagree with that. They thought that Ethereum needed to stand for immutability and shouldn't be changed under any circumstances. So they kept the old version and just kept adding onto it, and they're known as Ethereum Classic. The interesting thing about them, though, is that although Ethereum Classic kept this version of the blockchain with the hack happening, and the Ethereum Foundation went off in a different direction, essentially the paths of history forked, up until that point where they diverge, their shared history is exactly the same. So one consequence of that is everyone who owns tokens on Ethereum blockchain before the hack now owns an equal amount on the Ethereum and the Ethereum Classic blockchain. This happened also with Bitcoin, with Bitcoin Cash. And an interesting bit of little bit of trivia for people with finance background. Essentially, there's one token one asset, and now there's two assets, two tokens, which are seemingly identical to each other, although different chains might have different levels of adoption, and so their values might be different. Their valuations might be different, excuse me. And so you'd expect this somewhat to work probably like a stock split. Not that, it doesn't work out that cleanly though. Back in the fall of 2017, a project came out called Bitcoin Cash, and they did a hard fork off of Bitcoin. So it said, okay, here's Bitcoin, here's the history, and from this moment in history, we're going to start our own version with a slightly different slightly different code base. And so right before the fork, Bitcoin itself, one asset, one token was valued at about $3,000. Immediately after the fork, Bitcoin was valued at about $2,700, and Bitcoin Cash was valued at about $600. So somehow about $300 of value got created for each Bitcoin. So that's not quite what you'd expect, but crypto markets are weird. So that's what forking is. That's splitting off the history, either copying down the blockchain like we're doing with Ark, or splitting off the history and making a new sequence of transactions, but that originate with the shared history of the original blockchain. Whereas if you copy your own, you're starting out, your genesis block, your first block is completely different, and your history is in parallel to whatever other blockchain you were forking. So that's what forking is. What tokens are the digital representation of value that's transacted on top of the blockchain. So with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin token, the cryptocurrency is that token. It represents some amount of real world value, and we can transact it. So it's this digital representation of value, and obviously it can be exchanged through the blockchain. The blockchain is just the means for tracking who owns what at what time. It's the means for tracking all the receipts and transactions. And there's actually a few different kinds of tokens. In particular with Ethereum, there are many different standards for different kinds of tokens, because you can, in theory, create whatever token you want on top of Ethereum. But they do have certain standards to make sure that you're meeting security requirements, to make certain that your tokens are able to interact properly with smart contracts. And the most common kind of token is called an ERC20 token. ERC20 tokens are fungible tokens, which means that each token is identical to every other token. I can exchange one Ethereum for another Ethereum, and the value of the two is identical. Me owning this Ethereum versus that Ethereum isn't any different. So that's the most common kind of token used by ICOs, because ICOs are essentially saying, here's our units of ownership, or they're saying, here are our the tokens we want to raise funds with, or we're using them like reward points or whatever. These tokens are interchangeable with each other, and so we're going to issue these out now, sell these out, fundraise with them. And so whether you're using them to raise funds or as reward points, the ERC20 tokens are fungible tokens. And with Ark, what we're going to be doing when we have our own tokens on that blockchain, they're also going to be fungible tokens, although they're not called ERC20 because they're not on the Ethereum blockchain. They're just the Ark tokens. Ark only has the one token. A different kind of standard that Ethereum has is called ERC721 tokens. ERC721 tokens are non-fungible tokens, which means that each token is unique. Two given tokens are not the same as each other. They're not interchangeable. So this would be useful for if you need to track a class of asset where each one is different, like houses. Each house is somewhat unique. You're not just going to swap houses with your neighbor. Like those two houses are very different. Whereas if you have stocks or currencies, like it doesn't matter if I give you $1 and you give me $1, it's identical. Whereas if I take your house and you take my house, those are different things. So it matters that we recognize that those are different. And so ERC721 tokens are digital representations of unique assets. An example of one that got one token, ERC 721 token that got popular at the end of last fall was the CryptoKitties project. So the idea behind that was CryptoKitties are these digital pets, and we'll have ERC 721 tokens to be digital representations of those pets. And so each pet has unique genetic features, and they'll be encoded in this token. That's what makes it unique. So each pet was independent, and they were used for kind of like a trading card game. And so that's the difference between fungible and non-fungible tokens. That's forking, and that's blockchains. That's the tokens that exist on blockchain, whether they're being used for unique purposes or whether you're interchanging them with others. All right, so now we're gonna, while I've been talking, we've been downloading a few other packages, and in a moment we'll probably do another cut because there's still a few more commands to go through. So I'll just keep it running, right? All right, now that those packages are downloaded, there are a few packages, since this is a rather old, since this tutorial is just a few months old, there are a few other packages not in the tutorial that we're going to install. Those are Moment, ArcJS, BIP39, and ByteBuffer. The lack of those programs have caused others problems before, so we're just going to be safe and download those for everyone. And that'll just take a few little bit. Moment, ArcJS. All right, now we have those packages installed. Let's look at actually creating our network. So if we can see our projects, make sure you're in the Ark node folder. You should see Genesis block config files and a few support folders in there. Let's use nano to edit networks.json. All right, and we're just going to copy this block of code to add another recognized network. In the tutorial, they use Jark as their new token. I'm going to instead be using JWood, and I'll change some of the prefixes to match that. All right. So I'm just going to add those in, make sure yep. All right. Control X to save and get out of that. All right. Now we're going to go and edit some of the config files. So let's cd into tasks and do nano on the create Genesis block. All right. First, what we're going to do is go into network name and change that to the name of our new token. So for me, that's JWood. And then this isn't mentioned in the tutorial, but one helpful thing to do is go to the seed peers and further down the whitelist and add in our own server as a recognized IP address. So for me, that is for 5.77.220.46, and port, just keep that as 4100. And I'm going further down. There is a whitelist of of forging. We're just going to add in our own server to that list as well. 46. that should be it. Yep. So save those changes. And now let's make dir to make a new directory for demo. That's where our instance of the blockchain is going to go in. Now, making sure you're still in tasks, before we create our new blockchain, we're going to make one more additional edit. Let's go back up just into Ark node and cd int all right. So within tasks, let us run node on create Genesis block, and that's actually going to instantiate our config files. All right. So now inside of demo, there should be, looks like I made a little typo. Nano in create Genesis block, line 51, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I forgot to close that JSON object. That would be my bad. Right. Yep. That's all. Let's run the node command again. Oh. Interesting. It's complaining about oh. Yep, that snuck in there. Cannot find module ArcJS, which is a problem because it should have downloaded that. So let's make sure we have that package actually in. Do I understand what I did? No, but it works. Insert meme. It doesn't work. I don't know what it does. It works. I don't know what it does. So I worked on reinstalling ArcJS platform modules, and now we should have inside of, after running the node create Genesis blockchain, we should have inside of demo the config files. So now in step 7 of the tutorial, we're going to get into the demo, and we're just going to copy some of these files into, with the changing Jark to JWood, of course, copy some of these files into the Ark node folder, so just up a few levels. All right. Actually, before we copy the Genesis path, I'm gonna hop into there, and I'm just gonna change a few things. Where the total amount, instead of 21 million, I'm gonna change that to 23. Just want to before we instantiate them, just want to change the number of tokens we have. And we'll put them all in this one account here. There are other accounts we could seed with, yeah, why not? Let's seed 10, 100,000, another 5,000 tokens. We'll just randomly give that to one of the delegate nodes. All right. And now let's CP Genesis block JWood into Ark node. So that was just changing the number of tokens that will be instantiated. So now inside of Ark node, forever start app.js, this command will simply start the blockchain running, and you're just going to have to change, if you ended up not using Jark again, you'll have to change Jark to whatever name of your blockchain you have. So we'll do forever start, and that should start running. And so let's do forever list. And there we have our blockchain running. So a few things you can now do with this are, let's see. So we have our Genesis blocks inside of so let's go back into demo ls. So if you nano into delegates passphrases, this gives you the accounts, the passphrases, username, public key, and addresses of all of the delegate nodes. These are the nodes that are all working together to forge blocks on your blockchain. Right now, they're all hosted on the same server. Of course, if you wanted to decentralize it, you could have each of these on their own server. And so now you have the passwords of all of them. You can get into all of them. Nano Genesis passphrase for myself. Now you can see the passphrase for Shine, Glad, Monkey, Oval, Tonight, Left, Crash, Genius, Fiber, Tone, and Roll, Cube for our own account. If you want to play around with those balances, you can look into downloading the Ark Wallet. That will have, you'll have the ability to go into the network, add this blockchain as one of the recognized networks, and then you can use any of those passphrases to access the accounts of those public keys through that Ark Wallet. Also, the Ark community has a pretty active Git Slack channel and GitHub chat. So I hope you all have a nice week. Beyond that, I hope to see you all. I hope to see you all at BlockHack. I will have sign up link in the description. See you May 5th. Have a good week.